To Conversations, where today we have Jeremiah Burke, who is an author of Leading with Grace, Faith-Inspired Principles for Empowering Leadership and Operations. He is the director of Global Reach Leadership Institute, a speaker, leadership coach, and veteran strategist who is passionate about equipping everyday believers to lead with clarity, courage, and compassion, the 3 C's. Welcome to the show, Jeremiah. How are you today?
Oh, thank you for having me. I am doing wonderful. Very blessed to have written this book, and blessed to have met you and your website, and to have this conversation.
Yeah, we've had a few different engagements together, which has been fun to partner with you on those. And I would love to first ask you, what prompted you to write this book?
So it was about a 15-year journey, actually. So I was going through leadership training in the military, and one night I was just thinking, I was like, man, God's truth is God's truth, even if man discovers it a different way. And it's like, there's got to be a correlation there with the leadership stuff I'm learning and biblical principles. And started researching, had a notebook, and it never felt like the right time. And I guess God was working the wisdom part of it, because later on, fast forward, God put somebody in my life that inspired me to no, I can really write this book, and the more I got into it, the more I realized, everybody says the Bible is a blueprint of your life, but almost every story is about leadership. You take a Moses, Nehemiah, all of it, they're leading, and they're influencing, and showing God through their leadership and strength and all that. So that was kind of inspiration for the book.
That's terrific. And I love how he brought somebody into your life to then inspire you, right? God's word inspired you. And then it's fun how he orchestrates things. And then you had the confidence to move forward with that. So congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
With that. Well, typically when people think about leadership, it's all about dominance or control, even hustle. And so what does it mean to lead with grace?
I think it's, the first part is you got to lead yourself, that self-leadership, that self-reflection. Before you can lead anybody else, you have to have your own house in order. So leading with grace, it's about redefining leadership. It's about stewarding influence. It's not about asserting control. You're being a steward. Your followers are your steward of them. And so it's replacing authority with authenticity, power with purpose, and replacing dominance with discipleship. Actually investing into your people and trying to raise them up instead of just I always say we got plenty of managers in the workforce. We need leaders in the workforce, and there's a big difference between the two. There's a ton of books out there on how to manage and how to tell your people what to do and all that. But but that's where this book kind of is an internal reflection, and also some tips and tricks to look at a problem set in different ways. There's different ways to manage people, and also learning how to learn your people to know what works and what doesn't. So
I think when maybe some people think of grace, they think of it as being soft. Is it necessarily leading with grace soft?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I talk about servant leadership, not to mistake that, some people mistake that for weakness. And it's don't, and it's don't get run over by trying to be a servant leadership, but, it is a strength, because people see a difference. They see you're invested in their well-being, and most people respond to that. A good example, a perfect example of leadership is Jesus himself, and he was, like the woman at the well, he was soft, gentle. And then with the Pharisees, he was kind of more direct and, firm, I guess is the best way. And then, even rebuked his disciples, and at the same time tried to teach them. And then he came to the people with parables, because that was the way they learned at the time and all that. But at the same time, he was never controlling. So that so I wouldn't say that's soft leadership,
Mhm.
because there was times when he really uh, let them know they had missed the mark.
Yeah.
Say,
There has to be a balance of that in leadership,
yeah,
right? And having
yeah,
those truth-filled conversations, and there's
yeah.
consequences, there has to be accountability, all those things around leadership.
Yeah, and leading with grace, I can talk about like some of the leadership styles that get a bad name, like micromanaging or a more dominant uh, leadership style. Sometimes those are needed, like micromanaging. Like if you like the specs have to be exact, you're going to be a little more involved, or and then also too that more authoritative leadership. Some people, unfortunately, that's all they respond to, or that's all they understand. So you got to meet them there, and be a little more, say, dominant with that person.
Well, you mentioned self-leadership.
Hmm.
So why is self-leadership, which we both know is super important, mastering the mind, body, spirit, and soul essential for trying to lead others or helping, your own leadership lead others?
Hmm. Yeah, was it Luke 6, I think it is. Removing the plank from your own eye, before helping somebody else. That's self leadership. That's your that internal reflection. Because if you're how can you lead somebody if you're not doing it? It's like how can you tell somebody they need to show up on time if you don't show up on time? That's it seems simple, but it isn't. It's a lifelong journey. But you can't lead from an empty cup. Your physical habits, your mental clarity, your spiritual walk, emotional resilience. You have to focus on all those things to be that balanced leader that's needed to lead people. And because they're looking at you, they're looking up to you. You have to be the model. You got to model what you want your people to do. And so I think it's very important that that you do that self reflection. And look at yourself and what you can help yourself with.
Absolutely. I remember when I first heard of self-leadership, and it just was like a light bulb went off in my head, where how imperative it is if you are a leader to first, and you talked about being in order yourself
Mhm.
first. We
Right.
can't effectively lead others unless we are sitting in a place of being a healthy leader, not a toxic leader, not a dominant leader,
Hmm.
not always authoritative, sometimes perhaps, as you said, but
Right.
really coming from a point of being grace filled. And I love that, being self leadership, grace filled. I mean, grace filled
Yeah.
leadership.
And the reason I said grace filled, because there's a certain amount of grace that you have with yourself.
Oh,
You know, you
yes.
you know, you have to like even 360 feedback,
Mhm.
listening to your followers and having the grace to say, yeah, they're kind of right, and I'm messing up here. I need to be better at this thing. And there's a grace to that, a grace to yourself that you have to impart. And I think you know, that's you need that grace first of yourself before you can build yourself up and take care of those different aspects of your person. So.
That's super important when we're hearing feedback, to have that grace, just
Mhm.
be cloaked with grace, and to sit in those spaces of hearing sometimes really difficult things
Mhm.
about your leadership or how people are perceiving your leadership even.
Mhm. Yeah, and you got to encourage that, because
Mhm.
people, your followers aren't going to tell you if they don't think they can approach you, and
Mhm.
so you need to show that grace to them, letting them know that, hey, if I'm not missing the mark, please tell me. I have an open door. Come in, and we can discuss it and truly discuss it. Don't dismiss what they're saying, even if you might disagree with them, or they might not see the whole picture, but still let them, make them feel heard, and then go from there, and then show that you're trying to be a better leader. And that's a humbleness that a lot of leaders, it's hard for them to get, because, and there again, that's where grace comes in, because you're supposed to be the person with all the answers, and you got to have that grace to say, hey, I'm listening to you, you're right, and try to make a difference, try to change yourself and all that. And that's hard. It sounds simple, but it's very hard to
It
do.
is. And again, the perception. I was last week, I was
Mhm.
somewhere and I was having a conversation. I was asked what I did, and I told them, I work in leader and team development. And this person said, "Oh, leaders, big heads," you know. And it made me sad because no, yes, some leaders do have big heads, right? And
Yeah.
and the ego gets the best of them and whatnot. But we need to help leaders see that there is a heart to leadership and there's a heartbeat that you
Mhm.
have as a leader. And it's important to understand, what is the perception of my leadership? If
Yes.
it's that you have a big head, there's a problem there,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's hard for leaders too. They always say it's lonely at the top. Who do they go to seek guidance to bounce ideas off of? In a lot of organizations, they're the top. There is nobody else that they can be vulnerable to like that. So I've always encouraged people to find mentors, find people outside the organization, but at the same level of leadership or management, and bounce those ideas off. I mean, that's one thing. One of the things we do in Global Reach is that it's leadership, health, and wellness coaching. It's not just achieving goals, but it's like, okay, let's do it. Let's do a gut check. Where's your headspace at? Where are you? And do that. So we focus a lot on that mental health aspect of it because you might be getting that big head, like you said, and not even realize it or being perceived that way with your followers and all that. So it's very important. That's where that self reflection comes in.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that because I think one of the misconceptions about, let's just say, executive coaching is always strategy around the vision, the mission, et cetera, et cetera. Where many times, and I'm sure this is exactly what you're saying too, is you're sitting with and you're partnering with a very high level leader that is still a human,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And still has all these things going on.
Yeah. And
And
unfortunately, in the hustle culture, they don't have time to, or feel like they have time to address their own issues. And so they
that's
just
right.
compartmentalize it and push it away. But it's gonna come to the surface. It's gonna show in how you act, how you treat people, and how you lead. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a place for the, strategizing, vision,
Absolutely.
goal, and
Yeah.
all that. But there again, if you don't have that self-awareness and that self-health, it's going to fall flat. It's not going to be as effective as you would like it to be. I mean, both are important, you know.
Right. And really taking that pause out of your day to partner with somebody and have
Hmm.
that self reflection, like you're saying, is super important.
Yeah, yeah, and recently, I know a book came out with Charlie Kirk, and it was talking about taking the Sabbath. Taking a day for yourself, and that makes you such more of a effective leader. Sometimes you can't afford a day, unfortunately. But finding that space, you've got to find space uh, where you're just reflecting and praying and just recentering yourself. Maybe it's in the morning, keep the office door closed for an extra 20 minutes, 10, 20 minutes, and get your headspace right before you open that door and you start leading, kind of thing.
And that can be hard. I know for
Hmm.
me, it was really hard because I work from home.
Hmm.
And so my office, like many people, it's always here, right?
Hmm.
And I like how you said close the door. It's taken me, I've been practicing, and I think that's again with grace. You have to give yourself
Hmm.
grace during these times. I've had to give myself grace and say, today I'm just not working. This is, my Sabbath. I am not working.
Hmm.
And it took me a while to get into a rhythm of first giving myself permission to do that because there's always going to be something, right, that
Hmm.
needs to be done. You have a checklist, needs to be done, important to be done, but it's going to be there
Hmm.
the next time you step in.
Yeah.
And so for me, just the practice, it was a intentional practice for me. Again, permission first, followed by the action of not doing, which can be very difficult for some leaders.
Yeah. In my office, I literally have a prayer closet, not a closet, but I have a kneeler podium with my Bible and a cross, and it's on the other side of the desk, away from the computer screens. Mm-hmm. It's actually facing the wall, so nothing in my office is distracting me while I'm spending that time in prayer and all that. So I found that works for me to be able to turn everything off. Everybody has to find that way to turn it off, and everybody's different. So what works, but you got to find some way. And like you said, give yourself permission to have that space and all that. So.
Well, let's get into, which is always an interesting topic, of discerning God's voice. So when we think about that, whether this is, a Christian coach, a leader, how do we discern God's voice? And this could be decision making. Let's stick there. So on decision making, because it's one of those things where when people first hear, I heard from God, I know sometimes people get that feeling like, that's kind of weird. Let's just call it that. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful thing. And I've learned to recognize for myself what that's like, but I would love to hear from you about discernment.
So we'll start out with the first thing, like you said, people say, oh, you heard from God. And there's a danger there of your own inner desires, and you put it on that label, like, oh yeah, God told me to do this because that's what you wanted to do. Right. So that's where it should be a process, in my opinion, to discern God's voice and to make sure it is truly godly. It's not, just a voice from heaven necessarily, because God's going to confirm it. He's not a God of chaos. He's not, So in the book, I talk about how leaders are over-informed and under-inspired. They have all this noise from the world, and, they're making decisions based on that, and it gets harder to hear God's voice. So there again, it goes back to that quiet time, like that we talked about, that you're shutting the noise of the world off so you can focus on God. So to me, there's three filters of discernment. Scripture, it has to line up with Scripture. So if you think you're hearing from God, that's got to be the first criteria. It has to line up with Scripture. If it doesn't, it's not God. Pretty obvious. Your spirit, do you have peace with it or unrest with it when you're praying about it? Because if there's unrest, is that from God? You got to question that then. But if you have a peace about it, and there were some times that I stepped out in faith, but I wasn't even nervous about it when I should have been. There was just this peace, like, I know this is the direction, and other times, I'll say even writing this book, I was uncertain, and because it wasn't the right time. I had the knowledge, but I didn't have the experience. I learned so much more about leadership because I was young in the military at that point, young rank and all that. And I moved up the ranks, and every rank I learned a little more about leadership. And so it wasn't the right time, and I felt uneasy and unrest. And I was like, with the, not good enough to even write a book, kind of thing, those self-doubts too. But when I really sat down and made it a mission, I was finally at peace with it, and started writing. And then support, wise counsel, talk to somebody that's strong in the Lord, that has faith, that and wisdom, and seek that counsel. And you see that throughout the Bible. Very few went on it all alone. Even when God was leading them, they had, Moses had Aaron, Jesus had his disciples, and so you got to seek that wise counsel. That's that gut check to make sure that, is this God or is this my own desires? And somebody that's wise enough, they ask a few questions, they can usually figure out pretty quickly, which one's which. It usually doesn't take long, being that outside looking in kind of thing. So
I like that. The 3-step process. Get you to the 3 S's. We had the 3 C's earlier. We've got the 3 S's. I like that.
Yeah. Yep. Scripture, spirit, and support.
Yes. Very good.
And so, like, and to translate that to coaching, that's where you can get your clients to slow down a little bit. because, especially, I'm sure you've seen it where they're like, God told me to do this. I'm going to do it today, and it's like, okay, let's slow down, do the process, you know, uh, reflective tools like ask, listen, wait, that kind of thing, and journaling, if that's your kind of coaching style to have your the people you're coaching journal, you know, make them journal it out. Like what is God inviting me to do? What is his purpose? What purpose does it serve that God, I feel God is telling me, and make them really think it out too. Because not only does that confirm that it's coming from God, now you're setting up the foundation for them to think through how to be successful at whatever it is that they feel God is telling them to do. So it's kind of twofold at that point.
Yeah, because if you go too fast, sometimes yes, we need to move quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but many times if you're moving too quickly, you wish you hadn't. You wish you
Yeah.
took that pause and
Well,
really
you get ahead of God.
Oh, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, and a prime example that just came to my mind was Moses, striking the rock for water, and the second time God was telling him to speak to the rock, and he got ahead of God, and he's like, no, it just worked last time, I'm doing it this time, and struck the rock again, and that wasn't the purpose, and that wasn't where God wanted him to be at that moment, kind of thing. So,
and he's patient.
yeah.
But I'm sure that sometimes I think of it as he's like, come on, Kelly, how many times you have to go around this mountain before you listen?
Yeah, it's kind of twofold, isn't it? Like sometimes we don't go fast enough because we're doubting that God is doing what He's doing. It's like I'm not sure. And you're just you pause and you hesitate, and then other times you go too fast. So you got to there again. That's that reflection, that counsel from somebody. Hopefully, the end goal is to put you in that right frame, that not too fast, not too slow kind of frame, to be right where God wants you at that time and all that. Right. So
sweet spot. Yes.
Sweet spot.
Yeah. So I love practicality. So what are some practical ways leaders today can create a culture of flourishing and moving their teams from not just following, but thriving?
Right. So I talk about uh, moving from compliance to capacity. Not just telling people what to do and they do it, but creating an environment where people grow into what they're called to and called to be. That takes mentorship, coaching, direction, training. But all those things. But you have to try to use the right tool at the time. So that's where you look at the person's capacity. And what I mean by capacity is a little formula is ability and willingness equals capacity. So you might be able and know that job, but if you're not willing to do it, there's a certain kind of coaching or mentorship you need to do with them. If they don't have the skills yet, but they are really willing, well, that's training. There's a different way to approach that. And so there's different levels of capacity or ability and willingness to determine a follower's capacity, and then you form a strategy to how you're going to approach that employee and how to get them to be their best and be their most productive. Some people you're never going to get through to them for willingness. There's just there's some people out there that, not to say they're a lost cause, but they might just wrong job, wrong fit, but they got to make a paycheck, and you're never going to reach them. But the majority, that 90%, if you use the right tools, you're going to reach them and make them better. And then ideally, then they start doing that for others, and then that's your new leader that you've mentored and brought up and all that. So
yeah, the whole example, leading by example, and and having somebody actually get it.
Yeah, that aha moment. That's I love seeing that. Do that when the light bulb finally goes off over their head. I'm like, it's a great feeling that God used me to get to them to that point. So and that gets to measuring success too. Metrics and KPIs, all that stuff. And that's where I really get into a little more faith-based flourishing, looking at the fruits. Because there's times when you look at companies that became successful, there was times when it was down and it looked like they weren't successful. Coca-Cola, a lot of them, Hershey. But if you look at the fruits of what's being produced, that's you go beyond the metrics at that point. Yes, shareholders or whatever, you got to have those metrics. But sometimes, you might have to take a dip to go even further up.
Right.
Sometimes, so you're looking at that patience and joy of the team as your team, gung ho. So sales aren't there, but their morale's up and they're there and they're trying their hardest. That's not the time to crack the whip. Yeah, your metrics are down, and that the instinct is like you're not trying hard enough. But if you see the fruits and all that, and you see that they are trying, and it's just maybe a slow season or
Right.
slow period of time, maybe that's not the best way to go about it, because then you've crushed that morale and you've crushed that enthusiasm that they had, in an attempt to try to get better metrics. So you have to really discern that. You really have to pay attention to the environment and your people and what they are doing. Because if they're not trying, yes, you need to be a little more.
And what I'm listening to you, and I'm also thinking, I believe it's my belief, my personal belief, that organizations should incorporate not just the hard metrics, like some of these soft metrics of, how are your people showing up, and is communication better? Is the relationship within the team better? Are they being inspired? Are they flourishing as a team, right? Or as individuals? These are super important, and they should not be discounted. Yes, we need the bottom line. We need to be making money and all da 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 da. But if your people aren't doing some of those things, right? If they're not communicating well, if the relationships they're not motivated, they're coming to work with dread and all those things, that's not good, regardless
not the right
of
environment,
making money or not. So how about incorporating some metrics where we can measure some of these other very viable metrics, right?
No, absolutely. In fact, the military does that. Every year they have a survey of the command that you're involved in, and they're looking at, how's your work environment? Are you feeling harassed? Or it's a toxic work environment. How's the communication? Do you know what the company's vision and mission statement is? And they ask those soft questions, and the CO and his boss see the results, and then it's like, okay, what are you going to do about it now? And then they come up with a plan to do it. So some corporations, some people do that, but if you're not, that's something that you really need to look at. Is that like you called those soft metrics, and then also not being afraid to give your people responsibility. Let them grow in their roles. Let them grow beyond their roles, so they are the next generation of leadership. Because if they're just doers and you just tell them what to do and they do it, when you're gone, who's replacing you? Where you can, if you build, and also too, then they feel ownership. Like, oh, this company, this leader is investing in me. I want to invest in them. And there's that, that transactional part of it where they get the buy-in. They get they feel ownership in what they're doing. It's like, oh, I was doing so well that they even gave me more responsibility. Some people are like, oh, I got more work. Being successful is punishment because now they're going to give me more work. But still, I mean, it's giving them that responsibility. Even to the point of let them fail forward. Don't be afraid of your people failing, as long as it's what I call smart failure. I had a boss that it was like a breath of fresh air. I mean, I'd been in the military probably 20 something years at this point. It was the first time I heard anybody say that. He took all the department heads and he's like, I want you to fail. He's like, if you fail, he's like, I want innovation. I want some of these problems that we have that we've never been able to solve to be solved. Right. He's like, as long as you can show me your thought process of why you thought it was a good idea, but it didn't work. He's like, I got your back. He's like, so that not being afraid to fail upward and all that. And that was that was like revolutionary to me, and we did, we got together and we came up with some really creative ideas. Not all of them worked, but some of them actually did and solved some problems, longstanding problems that the organization had and all that. So
Good.
just, yeah, let your people grow a little bit, and don't necessarily punish them hard for a failure if there was a logical steps to what that they thought that was a good idea, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So,
That's
um,
how the Post-it note came to be. Wasn't
yes,
supposed to be a Post-it note.
yeah, it's supposed to
We
be,
have them.
wasn't supposed to be a permanent glue or something like that, and
Yeah.
it failed,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah. It was a
yeah,
great failure, great failed attempt for sure. But
yeah,
it goes back to that word flourishing. This is how people flourish. And
yes,
that's where we
absolutely.
want people. I am
Mhm.
I am one that I do not like the word potential. It is like nails on a chalkboard for me because I feel that there's still a limit to that word. We want people flourish. We don't want people living up to their potential. To me, that's like just self-limiting. We want people flourishing where
Above their potential.
yes, way above, in this
Hmm.
wholeness that they were created to be
Hmm.
instead of just putting a cap on it. So I think, your word of
Yeah,
flourishing that you mentioned earlier, that is where, at least for me, I want to see my clients flourish.
absolutely. And and it's kind of funny. It's when I was in the military, a lot of people were like, "I'm not ready for the next rank." I'm not ready. I was like, you saw the potential, and
Yeah,
it's like you're never going to be ready for that next step higher until you're in that position,
that's right.
because people aren't going. If you're not in that position, people are going to treat you that way. The expectation isn't there, and you don't even have a voice or chance to do the stuff at that level of position. So, don't be afraid to go to that next level, even if there's a learning curve, and even if you fail a little bit at the beginning, because you're never going to learn unless you go to that next level, or go past your potential. You're not going to flourish. You're not going to be able to um, grow if you just stay in the same position. It's like, yeah, that's too far attainable. I can't reach that
Mm,
kind of thing. And that's where a good leader or a good mentor pulls them along, and
that's right.
sees that in them, and see that, hey, they can go further than where they're at. And that's where you got to keep, that's where you got to know your people. You can't be stuck in your office and going to meetings. You got to be out there with your people, and learn them, understand them, and what motivates them.
So important.
Yeah.
And it is about opening your door, doing walk arounds, or if you're, virtual, having, virtual meetings, and just say, hey, how are you doing? Learning, like you said, learning your people.
Mhm.
And how, I don't know, that's one of the things I feel like I've been knocking on the door to so many leaders is, do you really know your people? Like,
Right.
how well do you know your people? Do you know what motivates them?
Yeah.
Do you know what
Yeah,
recognition for them looks like and how they would like to be recognized?
absolutely. Because that's key too, is the recognition. Not everybody wants a employee of the quarter thing. It's like,
Right.
so what motivates them? What gives them that warm feeling that makes them want to do more for you?
Mhm.
It might not be a piece of paper. It might be a pat on the back or saying good job to them in front of everybody, or it might, whatever but everybody's motivated differently, and to find that motivation.
Might be a
I
Snickers
know,
bar.
I'll do that for a Klondike, but
There you go.
uh, yeah, um, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, but no, intrusive leadership. Some people call it intrusive leadership. And sometimes they take it too far. Like, boss is like, oh, what are you doing after work? What are you doing on the weekend? And you're like, oh, work, family, two different things. No. But it's still, there's a certain level of intrusiveness that you should go and learn your people, and know what's motivation. But also too, knowing that, hey, something negative is happening in their life,
Mm-hmm.
on their personal life. So, one thing that, I've coached people is don't be so quick to jump on your employees when they're not measure, when they're not they're not meeting the mark. Find out why. Why are they showing up late every day? Oh, well, wife got a new job, they have to drop the kid off every day. And that's where you get a chance to flourish, because you're like, okay, you have to drop your kid off every day. What if you come in a little later and stay a little later, or if that's possible for that?
Mhm.
And then now they're like, wow, my boss is really interested in my
Yes.
well-being.
That's right.
So find out, why they're not missing the mark, as much as telling them that they're missing the mark and all that, and then come up with solutions with them, because then they get buy-in. It's like, okay, how can we, you're not meeting this mark. What can we do, me, your boss, and you, to rectify this, to get this to the mark we need it? Come up with a plan with the employee, and now they got buy-in because it's their plan. It's their idea of how to get to that mark, kind of thing. So,
That's good stuff.
yeah. So, and that's I tell people: are your people just performing, or are they transforming?
Mhm.
Are they innovating? Are they looking for, are they doing their job the way they're told to do their job? Or are they looking for more efficient ways, better ways, to do that? And that's where, if you're a good leader, they're going to they're going to look for better ways. They're going to look for ways to improve things. And also, uh, uh, be efficient. And there again, that buy-in. So.
But again, it might go also back to that permission. Like, do your
Mhm.
people have permission? Have you verbally told them? Because so many times leaders think in their heads, oh, they should know. Well, maybe they don't. So how can we give them permission to be all those things that you said if we're not painting our people into the picture of the organization and why we even exist and what we do? They're just going to come in and get a paycheck.
Yeah,
they're not going to do all
absolutely.
those other wonderful things.
Yeah, two pet peeves of mine is, oh, they should know that, and well, this is the way we've always done it. That's
Mhm.
two. When I hear somebody say that, it's like nails on chalkboard to me, because it's like, that's two sentences that should never come out of a leader's mouth.
So tune in, leaders.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that just, those are two phrases that they're leadership killers in a way. I mean, you have that mentality.
No. Flourishing, transformation, thriving, all those wonderful words that are positive. We want to encourage all of that for our people. Yeah. Wow. Good stuff, Jeremiah.
Taking 30 years to figure that out, but
hey, I'm with you, but that's okay. We get to impart the knowledge and experience, right? Which is pretty fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the last word here? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest thing is what we said at the beginning: giving yourself grace. Leaders, you need to give yourself grace. You need to be humble. Get that feedback from your people. Get that feedback from your peers. And take that time to self-reflect and look inward in ways that you can better yourself. And some of that is through prayer, getting in the Bible, using those biblical principles in everyday life. You don't have to be religious to your people, but you can still model and exemplify those biblical principles, and people are going to take notice. They're going to realize there's something different about you than other managers. So just, be humble. I guess that's the final word, is be humble with yourself, and know that you don't know everything, and that, be willing to learn. So
where can people find your book?
So Leading with Grace.
There it is.
So it's available in all the electronic bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You can get it directly through Archway Publishing from there. But yeah, anywhere there's an ebook version, and or you can order a hard copy for those of us that like the tactile feel of pages in our hands and all that. So
that's right.
That's the main things. And then I social media, Leading with Grace on Facebook is there, and then LinkedIn, Jeremiah Burke. If you search that, you can find me there from there. And then there's a website that it's kind of just a where you can click on it to get to where you can buy the book. Gracefilledleadership.com.
Gracefilledleadership.com.
Yeah, gracefilledleadership.com.
We'll put those in the show notes.
Okay.
All right. Well, you've heard it here, folks, with Jeremiah Burke. Thank you so much. And until next time, you keep doing great things, and we'll see you soon.